You see, and the reason why we're dealing with this bill at the moment is because of the economic profligacy of the coalition, the lack of economic reality by the coalition. You know, you hear much from the coalition arguing about what great economic managers they are and were under the Howard government. Well, I think the longer I sit in this place and listen to the arguments put forward from the coalition, the more I realise that it is simply a myth, that the coalition were not good economic managers, that the coalition will never be good economic managers. In fact, I've said on a number of occasions, probably the worst treasurer we've had in recent times has been Peter Costello. Why? Because Peter Costello didn't have the backbone, didn't have the courage to stand up to the giveaway mentality of John Howard, his leader. He didn't do it. And John Howard was always on the lookout for some way to give money out to those that he thought could do some good for the coalition. And it was a giveaway mentality by the Howard government. And Peter Costello never had the courage, never had the conviction to actually stand up against John Howard. And on that basis, he was an absolute abject failure. If somebody wants to raise their hand for more money, give it to them, because we might get a vote. That was the approach of the coalition. They were economic incompetence. They are economic incompetence now. And let me just say, you know, there's a book that was launched last week, and it's called The Australian Moment by George Megalogenis. He's one of the, I think, most widely respected economic commentators and writers in this country. And on page 302 of The Australian Moment, he said this, and I'll just quote: "Every voter that cried cost of living was given a wad of cash to quieten them down." Now he's talking about the Howard government here. They were given a wad of cash, you know. John Howard said, "Oh, we've got a problem over here. Throw some money at it. Don't worry about setting up a sovereign wealth fund for the future of the country. Don't worry about making sure the public health system's okay. Don't worry about the public education system. We got some of our mates up in the North Shore that are not too happy. Throw some money at them." So this is what George Megalogenis says. He says, "But then the next voter wanted the same. The competition for handouts infected the government itself. Howard and Costello argued repeatedly over the quantity and the content of the largesse." So this wasn't economic responsibility. This was largesse. This was bribes. This was port barrelling. This was the Howard government in full flight. Economic incompetence, throwing money wherever there was a problem, without any worry about the consequences for the country. So it goes on to say, while Howard searched for the next payment to make to his target audience, who's the next target, who are going to make a payment to, Costello tried to reinforce a sense of purity by cutting income taxes as well. You know, you hear the coalition all the time, we've got to cut income tax, we've got to cut taxes. You know, we're the party of low taxes. Well, let's see what this eminent economic analyst says about that. He goes on to say the upshot was taxes were no longer being collected to provide public services or to build buffers in good times to deploy in bad times, but to churn back to the electorate. The budget became a frequent voter programme with rewards based on loyalty, not need. Now, if there was ever a very concise analysis of the lack of economic credibility by the Howard government, there it is, on page 302 of The Australian Moment by George Megalogenis, and that just nails this argument about proper economic process under the Howard government. He goes on to say on page 303, the reform decades of the 1980s and 90s had promised a more productive nation that could compete with the rest of the world. But the GST blotted the script. You know, the great economic change from the Howard government, the GST, blotted the script by facilitating the rise of middle-class welfare in the 21st century. This is not just middle-class welfare that we are trying to deal with in this bill. This is upper-class welfare. This is welfare to the super-rich, and we are determined to deal with it. And Megalogenis goes on to say subsidies that the Hawke and Keating government had taught us to live without were being revived by Howard in an act of electoral appeasement. Electoral appeasement. That's what the Howard government were about. And he goes on to say, but it was bad policy because it reverted to the mentality of the 1970s, when every family was told it deserved to gorge on the magic pudding of government protection. Well, John Howard was the chief architect of that magic pudding. He made the recipe, he baked the cake, and the magic pudding was everybody had to get middle class and upper class welfare. And that just demonstrates how inept and how incompetent the Howard government were in terms of economic approaches for this country. They were prepared to put their electoral success before the economic success of this country. So my view is, all the arguments you hear from Senator Abetz, the arguments about class warfare, are all about trying to paper over what is becoming more and more clear, that the coalition government under John Howard were economically incompetent and were not. They've sent in the cavalry. They've sent in the cavalry. We've got now a defender. Imagine sending the National Party in to defend economic competence. Imagine sending Senator Nash from the National Party in to try and hector me, to try and lecture me about economic competence, when the coalition's economic competence was driven by people like John Howard and the then leader of the National Party to actually, just send money anywhere that there was a problem. Just send it out into the community. Just try and bribe your way back into office. Pork barrel your way to government. That's the National Party approach. So when Senator Nash comes in here, Mr. Acting Deputy President, and starts trying to have a go at me about economic issues, she should actually have listened. I'm sure somebody was listening. They said, you better get someone down there because Senator Cameron is carving our economic credibility up. He's carving our economic credibility up. And it's not a big job. It's not a big job because there's not a lot of economic credibility there to carve up. So they're all going now. They're all going. It would be Microsurgery carving their economic credibility up. Not a lot of it there. Not a lot of it there.